world, thank you very much for joining us for this session of the small-scale PPP program, which the World Association of PPP Units and Professionals is running in partnership with the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. I cannot start without thanking our steering committee for its support of this program and thanking the Working Party on PPP at UNECE for its support as well. As many of you who have participated in these sessions before know, these are preparatory sessions for a publication of guidelines on small-scale PPPs that will be published by UNECE and WAP later this year. We consider small-scale PPPs to be very important for the achievement of the SDGs because without them, we are now on a rate of about 300 PPP projects per year, and that is definitely not enough to achieve the SDGs. We're hoping that through small-scale PPPs, we will have thousands of PPP projects every year implemented around the world. This will require cooperation from governments, a change of approach from the national PPP units towards programs, and a activity and emphasis on capacity building with local government authorities. Of course, the subject of small-scale PPPs is a lot more complex than that. We started this series by talking about what are considered as small-scale PPPs. We then looked at what are some of the hurdles. We looked at what are some of the ideas that are being tested. And then we looked at some case studies from around the world. We had 3 sessions on case studies. We talked about the legal aspects. We talked about financing of various ways of financing small-scale PPPs. And with today's session, we are starting the process of looking at sector by sector. So the next few sessions are going to be sector focused. And we're very happy to kick off with the sector of water and wastewater PPPs. So I'm delighted to introduce the moderator of the session, Amanda Lofen. Amanda is the CEO of Human Right to Water and chair of the water chapter at WAP here with us. She's a member of the steering committee of WAP. She's an experienced project manager in water, energy, and sustainable development, supporting organizations to be more human rights-based in their approach. Through stakeholder engagement, monitoring of human right-based indicators, and supporting nature-based solutions, she provides tangible processes and results to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Amanda provides practical and systematic approaches, drawing on a field of experts in human rights law, governance, and project management. Amanda has been fantastic at leading our water and wastewater sector. She has been an excellent ambassador for WAP, whether it is at the World Bank annual meetings or otherwise. So we're very delighted to have Amanda with us today to lead this session. And with that, Amanda, I turn it over to you to introduce the discussants of today's session.
Oh, thank you, Ziad, for such a nice introduction. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here with you all. If you work in the water sector, you'll be very aware that there are more than 2 billion people globally still without access to water, clean and safe water, and even more without toilets in the home and without connection to sustainable wastewater systems. So today we're going to explore the challenges and opportunities for small-scale PPPs in the water and wastewater sectors, focusing on innovative financing approaches for projects in low-income countries, and particularly in rural and peri-urban areas or small towns. Our goal is to share experiences through some case studies and provide new ideas for other PPP units working in the sector, drawing insights from regions in Mozambique, Angola, Tanzania, and Latin America. We extend a warm invitation to all attendees to actively participate in today's session, Your input, as well as the panelists, is highly valued, and we encourage you to share your comments and questions using the dedicated Q&A tab on the screen. Please feel free to utilize the chat function to engage with fellow participants and engage your thoughts. We're anticipating an engaging and interactive session. And in today's session, each panelist will share insights into their own projects, explaining how they managed to make their projects work. There'll be a brief Q&A following each presentation, for which you're welcome to put forward questions. And towards the end of the session, we'll have a longer, more interactive Q&A segment with all presenters, and we encourage the audience to ask questions, again, using the chat or Q&A function. And we can address some of these towards the end. So let's get started. Our first presenter today is Liliana Clara Alves. She has a BSc in Civil Engineering, an MBS in Energy and Environment Engineering, and a postgraduate in Climate Change and Sustainable Development Policies. With more than 25 years of experience in the water and sanitation sector, and in both the private and public sector, she's currently working as a project manager, implementing institutional and sustainable support to urban water supply and sanitation service delivery projects in Angola for the National Water Directorate. So Liliana, please can I hand the floor over to you?
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. So without further delay, I will start sharing my presentation. As we could listen, I will speak a little bit about the experience in Angola regarding the management contracts for capacity building, operation and maintenance. Like we have the opportunity to hear, the water and sanitation access is a challenge. We are a little bit far from reach the targets that we desire in the Agenda 2030. But the access is also is a big concern, but also to keep the infrastructures operational is also a huge challenge. So this case is related to involve private partners to strengthen very young utilities in Angola that was recently created through a management contracts in order to support these utilities to provide a better service for these end users, and also to support the extension of the water access to the communities. So these utilities, they have been chosen because they are the youngest one, very recently created to be supported. So this project starts with, in the procurement planning, with a strong work on designing the planning stage that cover baseline reports to understand exactly the stage, willingness to pay reports and tariff proposal, implementing plans, bidding documents, workshops, stakeholders engagement and market assessment. The second stage, after all this consultation, the bidding documents has been completed and the tender was carried out. It was an unconsulting service with a quality cost-based selection. The contract has been designed for 3 years, considering a possibility to extend for additional 2 years. And these contracts have are KPIs performance indicators with incentives and penalties associated. So these contracts are designed with a strong component of staff in order to transfer knowledge for all the staff of the utility in different areas. Also acquisition of equipments, tools, special attention for ARP in order to change the way that these utilities work in order to improve efficiency, and also was considered to develop a master plan in order to make it easy to look for the future's investments that could be needed. During contract implementation, I would give a very special highlight to the monitoring and evaluation that was required to ensure that this contract meet the targets that was established. Also, the stakeholders engagement, the meetings in order to correct sometimes the roads in order to facilitate the achievement of the KPIs. Workshops, peer learning experience with the other utilities, and also the relationship between public entity and private operators. The last aspect that I will like to bring attention is on the closure of the contracts. So because 3 years or even 5 is not so long time, so the work will not finish with these contracts, and it's very important to continue following up to understand that the main aspects in the contract was achieved and the utility is capable to run the business as planned. Looking a little bit with the detail for the performance indicator, this contract established the need to report in a monthly basis 33 KPIs. However, 7 of them has been chosen to be linked with the incentives and penalties. They are related with the operational time, operation costs covered by the revenues, water meter, financial statements, water quality, and bill water collected through the year. So this has been chosen considering that they are very important KPIs to measure the sustainability of the utility. Looking for the results of the 3 years, this information, this picture allow us to see from orange was the level of each utility was considering the revenues, and in blue it was the change that they achieved in the end of the 3 years. If we look for the annual revenue or for the bill water collected, we also can see in the 3rd year a big progress. And also we can see that these contracts face a huge challenge that was COVID-19. So they start in September 2019, meaning that in 2020, as is possible to see, the KPIs didn't grow like expected, but a huge effort has been done and the results has been progressively achieved. Regarding the operational cost, this is a very complex KPI. So we are not yet in the point that we should or that we like, but we are working on it. And also the water metering was a very important factor to improve the sustainable indicators. Looking a little bit for the key aspects and lessons learned, I would like to highlight the needs of a planning process, very detailed, very tailor-made to each utility. They are different and is important to design in an adequate approach. The appropriate mark assessment is very important, and also the capacity of the procurement entity in managing monitoring and evaluation, and put the stakeholders together. Finally, regarding the lessons learned, I would highlight the duration of the contract that is very small considering the needs. COVID-19 and force majeure bring a huge challenge, and the importance of have independent assessment for the KPIs. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Great. Oh, thank you, Liliana. And I think what your presentation demonstrates is the way one way of overcoming some of the lack of capacity in small operations that need support. I noticed we had a few questions in the chat and the Q&A, and they reflect actually some of the questions I was going to ask you. So it's a management contract, which I know is funded by the African Development Bank at the start. But there is an opportunity there once the utilities have managed to reach a certain capacity to sort of spin them off, as it were, and also attract the private investment and create a more typical PPP. Am I right in that? Or maybe you can just talk us through that process, because my understanding was that you have a number of these projects and some are doing better than others, and some of them are still on the management contract and some of them are moving into the next stage.
So just to bring maybe a little bit more clarification, let's say that to be a full private involvement project, the utilities need to be in a level of preparation or the investments that also can be attractive for the private sector. So this first approach is to bring a different level of preparation in order to give this first step for the private sector. So the finance was finance from African Development Bank, and the main aspects here related with the private is the KPIs and the payment that are related with the achieving or not the results that are expected under these contracts.
Right. Right. So just in terms of other questions in the chat, we will be sharing your presentation for everybody who's attending afterwards. So you don't need to scribble everything down. But I think that this is a way of potentially helping to build capacity in the sector to encourage more investment in the water sector. Do you see this being something that can be scaled up?
I would say yes. If you look, and Angola have this particular specificity, but if we look for all African sub-Saharan, if we consider the prospects of population growth, so there is a high need of construct infrastructures and make sure that they're still available to and functional after the construction. So if we think that only the public sector is doing this job, it can be a very demanding activity, considering still the lack of water and sanitation access that we are dealing with, and the additional needs that come every year with this growing, with a huge pressure in the urban and peri-urban areas. So I believe that this can be escalated and can be, let's say, the first step to go for a different level of involvement of the private sector. And also from the public point of view, the countries need to be prepared to adapt maybe some laws, to be ready to revise the tariffs with the time that is required. So there are, let's say, a preparation from both sides that need to be done in order to put PPPs in place.
Right. So that answers one of the questions in the chat. One of the participants says this is not a PPP, which it isn't to begin with. But the idea is, I think, is to try and build capacity in the utilities such that they can become PPPs, and then you can move on to the next one to support. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I'm good. Okay. Now, other questions in the chat that we have here specifically for you. Jyoti asks, how can you explain, could you explain the KPI for knowledge transfer, and how did the contract achieve that, I think she means, and how did you verify this capacity building? So she would like some specific KPI information. I don't know if that's possible in the
Yeah, but this is a very good question, because it's a very challenging point. So first, we establish training plans that should be carried out. All the staff of the utility need to be trained, and these trainings need to be reported. And during the contract implementation, we carried out specific moments to interview the staff of the utilities in different areas to understand if the effectiveness of this training, because the training can be delivered, but in the end of the day, the knowledge cannot be there. So these sessions has been done through the period of implementation in order also to correct or to do more training in the areas that are needed. And this was particularly relevant when we speak about introduction of new systems, ERP, that change completely the approach of the utility. All the members of the utility need to work with the different tools. And this was really challenging. But we create, let's say, a technical committee with the different expertise that during the time carried out this interview and produced reports to understand the effectiveness of this training process.
Great. Okay, thank you. I hope that answers at least some of the question there. We have a number of other questions. We have time for one more at this point. In terms, maybe I'll just do it chronologically. What motivates the private sector in Angola to be involved in the water sector? Very general question, but I like it because I'd like to hear your opinion on that.
Okay, so this, like I shared, is a way to start. And there are, let's say, big challenge. And this approach is exactly to make that way more easy. First, to bring the private sector to the market, they will be able to know the market better. So when we will have a different, let's say, a long-term PPP, if the country choose to have it, the market will be better engaged and we will better understand the local conditions. Also, when we look for the public sector, we will have also time to make the changes that are needed and to adapt and also to understand what kind of results they can have. Because the involvement of the private sector is linked with the efficiency and the high performance. That is exactly what we expect. And this needs to be done fast. So let's say that this is a way to better prepare the market for that.
Yeah. And I think looking at your graphs, there definitely are signs that it's working because you can see the uptick in capacity over that period. I'm going to stop there with you for now, Liliana, but we will have the Q&A at the end. And any questions people would like to ask, and in addition, we can hopefully include them later if they're burning. Thank you, Liliana. And we'd now like to move to our second speaker, Pedro Simone. He's a Mozambican expert in water resources management. He has a distinguished career spanning 2 decades and started as a civil servant in Mozambique's water sector in 1998. He then transitioned to consultancy and worked on the AFDB's SADC Transboundary Water Resources Management Project in 2010 and the World Bank's Water and Sanitation Program in Mozambique from 2014. And most recently, he led the USAID WashFin Mozambique team from 2019 to 22 and currently serves as chief of party for USAID's Transform Wash Mozambique initiative. So Pedro, welcome. I know you have been working on a really big program out there. And I would really appreciate it if you could share some of the key aspects that have enabled you to bring to cluster together smaller utilities in the water and wastewater sector to enable them to be more economical. I know it's still a work in progress, but please share your slides with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. Let me try to share my screen.
Pedro, you have 7 minutes, just to remind you.
Yeah, share my screen. Can you see my screen?
We can, thank you.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, as Amanda says, it's a work in progress. Thank you very much for this opportunity. So as Amanda said, I'm Pedro Simone. I'm currently chief of party of Transform Wash. Transform Wash is an activity funded by USAID to support the government of Mozambique to enhance the delivery of water supply service. So just for for the sake of some who may not know Mozambique, I wanted to say that Mozambique is located in Southern Africa, very close to South Africa. It's just 45 minutes fly from our capital to Johannesburg. Key statistics, I would say that from the 33 million people that we have now, in terms of inhabitants, 65% live in rural areas. And also, some statistics show that our GDP as of 2022 was $18.4 billion, meaning that we are still in a low-income country with the 554 per capita in terms of GDP. Moving to water sector, the statistics shows that, as I said, most of the population live in rural areas. So the rural water supply coverage is at 41%, and the rural water sanitation at 16.9%. So where the majority of people live. The government estimates are of $3 billion for water supply investment needs since 2015 up to 2030 to achieve SDG. In sanitation, $1.0 billion. So the number in sanitation is lower because most of sanitation investment is made by the family themselves, and here we are counting only the public sector investment needs. Just a quick introduction of the Mozambique water sector, which is a little bit complicated with a number of government departments responsible each for one of the areas. For example, this one, FIPAG, is responsible for water supply in large urban areas. IAS is responsible for water supply in small towns, and this is the main focus of our support to the government of Mozambique. When we say small towns in Mozambique, we are talking about the district capitals, and we do have something like 135 officially small towns in terms of water supply. So those small towns, we are talking about a population of 4.5 million last year in 2023, but it projected to be 5.3 million by 2030. So this means that we have an average of 35,000 people per town now, and we expect this average to grow to 39,000 by 2030. But the water coverage in those small towns is still a big challenge, 14%. You remember that I said in rural water supply, we have 41%, but in small towns, which is our district capitals, the coverage is only 14%. And the entity which is responsible for water supply in those towns is this one, IAS. So how they operate, they deliver piped water systems, and they hire private operator to run those systems through a lease contract. So this is the model that they are using now. We tried to come up with a new model because in 2021, when we conducted a study, we found that only in small towns, there was a need of $563 million to make the pace to SDGs. And what the government had as a commitment was only 250 million. When we see government committed is the sum of government transfer to small towns, water, and donor support. So there was a deficit of $313 million. But when we look into the macroeconomic situation of the town's ability and the ability to pay for water, the only blended financing that can be made was for example, one public sector dollar or one donor's dollar could leverage only $0.6 for private sector. But even with this, with small amount for private sector, we think that it could make a difference because only using the $250 million in the way that is being used, where the government delivers 100%, government donors pay 100% of the system delivery. By 2030, we would have just 48%. But if we could blend it, we could have moved it from 48 to 78%. So the concept that was developed was to create a financing mechanism where donors and the government will channel their funds, and those funds will be used in two windows. The first window would be to provide viability gap for private investment, meaning that there's 0.65% would come from donors, but the private sector will bring at least 35%. We are talking about averages. In some towns, maybe private sector will bring more money, but in other towns, a little bit less, according to the size of towns and the macroeconomic condition. But in average, we are talking about 35% from the private sector and 65% from the grant financing from the fund. And then once the private partner build the systems and start operating it, the resource, the collection for water tariffs would be used for its own costs, its own profit, and to pay back its debt, but no need to return the advance that was made by the fund. So the system would work like that. To ensure that the people with lower or from lower income neighborhoods get also access to water, there was an output-based window where once the private partner had delivered the connection, it will receive a subsidy to incentivize it to also connect people of low income. So this is the general structure that was thought. The main concept that I could explain here is that what we are proposing is that the financing mechanism is not managed by the government, is managed by a private entity. So we have a private manager who is hired through a competitive tender, and this tender is run by a fund committee, which is comprises people from government and also from donors that who are contributing. And the resources are channeled to a custodian bank or a commercial bank, and this custodian bank will release the resource according to the instruction provided by the project manager, but also by following the rules defined by the financing mechanism committee. So this is the idea that we brought out to ensure that we can provide confidence to the donors, but confidence also to the private partner that could the mechanism.
Pedro, is this your last slide? Because we're running out of time for questions if we're not careful.
Okay, but I'm finishing.
Okay, super.
Yeah,
super.
It's just the advantage and advantage, but all are described above. Thank you very much.
No, that's okay. Sorry to interrupt you. I very much appreciate you sharing this project, and one of the questions that's come through from the chat, which I think is really salient in terms of your presentation. So you've talked about the funding the requirements for this, which obviously are very important, but it isn't just the lack of finance that you're addressing with this program, is it? It's also looking at how to make the whole system more efficient, from what I understand, because you've got the clustering of knowledge and capacity as well. Perhaps you can just address that one quickly before we move on to the next presenter.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, we are trying to address the lack of financing because it's not a secret. Most of African governments are almost constrained by high debt. So we are trying to find a mechanism that the sector can still be funded even without the need for government intervention in terms of sovereign debt. But also, if you have an operator who has already put some money in the water supply system, we do believe that this is per se an incentive for increasing the performance of this investor and operator at the same time.
So I'm guessing as well, if I can just stretch the time a little bit to ask you one more question, which captures some of the questions from the audience. So perhaps you can just expand on the outputs specified in the OBA payments. I think this is possibly getting to the issue of how this is defined as a project differently from other sort of more typical PPPs.
No, this is one of the what is one of the incentives that we want to give to the private operator once he's engaged in this PPP, because we know that although we are talking about the PPP, we are also talking about a social service. So we don't want a private operator who comes and then put all priority on the high income neighborhoods. So we want also to incentivize this private sector to connected to low-income neighborhoods. So once the connection is made, he claimed the connection and get paid. But it's not just claiming. There will be an independent verification modality, which include a specific an independent verificator, but also the sector regulator to confirm that the connection was made to a low-income neighborhood, so that can receive this payment.
So the inclusion of the private sector is an incentive to increase efficiency effectively, because otherwise they won't get paid, and that needs to be a part of the program. So thank you for your presentation, Pedro. We don't have a lot of time for questions now, but we will be asking more towards the end, so we can maybe expand on some of your ideas in that. And I think what we need to think about as we go through these is the different approaches that we're looking at and how they can help us to overcome some of the hurdles with small-scale PPPs in the water sector, because it's not just about return on investment, it's also about the capacity building that's required, and how do we get some of these smaller scale PPPs over the line. So thank you very much, Pedro. Please don't go away. We want to talk to you a bit more in a few minutes. Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce our next presenter, Janita Ferentinos, who has over 30 years of professional experience in East Africa. She's developed extensive project management, stakeholder management, and capacity building skills, particularly in the PPP area. And as the longtime part-time supervisor at the Tanzania PPP Center, she recently supported a PPP strategy, envisioning a pipeline of small-scale PPPs. And she's also developed a tailored training program for local officials. So very complementary, but slightly different approach is coming out from each of these case studies. So we look forward to hearing your presentations, Janita. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. I'll share my screen with you. And here we are. Can you see my screen?
We can, thank you.
Okay, great. So what you see here is Tanzania. I am, yes, indeed, I do work as a part-time consultant to the PPP center in Tanzania, and I have been here for a very long time, so I will be speaking a little bit to the Tanzania example. For instance, in Tanzania, the small-scale PPP by law are defined those PPPs that are below $20 million of capital investment. So there we already have where we are going to look at, okay, innovation, efficiency, how do we do this? And to apply this to the water sector is very much looking at the innovative approach to it. A lot of people will say, does Tanzania have a track record? Yes, indeed, Tanzania has a track record historically for small-scale PPPs, even before they actually have a PPP legal framework in place. For instance, an example, very nice one, is the Chumbe Island in Zanzibar, very exotic. That was actually had a very sensitive under threat for overfishing and overharvesting. And I know this does not water sector, but it's a very good example of how an innovative approach can have an amazing effect, whereby the private party that is running this project right now, under a PPP, a proper PPP with the Zanzibar government, is that the tourist approach to it now is only having like $150,000 investment in a year, on a yearly basis, but have a very big effect on the ecosystem of the island. And it is a success for over more than 3 decades now, because of the way it was set up. It was set up well prepared. It was set up, the sustainability plan was impeccable, and the the reason why it was also very successful is because of the stakeholder engagement. Everybody involved was part of the discussion. Hence, this project has been renewed to last a long time. Coming to innovation, the other one is my own pride and joy was mHealth Tanzania PPP program. And this is another point I would like to throw into the group. When we look at small-scale PPPs and we look at innovation specifically, you're starting to identify the project. It's going to go through the proper appraisal phase. During this, you will find out really like who's going to be involved, who are the stakeholders, what do we need, and how, who do we need on board? Is it technically and financially, the financial structure clear? Is it sustainable? Is the agreement well constructed and to test the tides of time? And is there political backing? Then during the appraisal phase, you might find that it's not exactly applying to the actual definition of a PPP, the way the World Bank or the APMG CP3P program would define it. But does that really matter in that case? You can still call it a partnership, private participation, as long as it works. And then I do see a lot of people in small-scale PPPs, when we talk about small-scale PPPs, they're so stuck to the definition of PPPs that they want it exactly in that little box. And I'm a trainer, I advocate for whatever works. Whatever works, as long as there's active participation and it works for you, as long as you do your homework well, which is the appraisal phase, the studies, your structuring, as long as everybody knows what that will be done, especially the financial structure, of course, because you're dealing with the private sector. Call a spade a spade. Whatever works for you. Don't force it in order to fit that particular model. That is what happened here, was that it was such a beautiful model. It was private sector participation rather than an actual PPP, I would say. But it all depends on what your definition is. Now, Tanzania today, when this is all way before, and this way before 2010, this last project is the one that I mentioned here, started in 2010. The other one that I showed you here started in 1993, even before the actual PPP law was really taking shape. Today in Tanzania, small-scale PPPs are very much envisioned. For instance, the Miundo Hub was doing a feasibility study. That is under $20 million. So Tanzania is paving the way. They have worked really hard to ensure that this is all going to happen. It's part of their PPP project pipeline. And the framework, sorry, going back here, the legal framework of Tanzania has been also very clearly outlining what small-scale PPPs are and how the private sector is protected. $20 million frontier, they still will be able to enjoy all the viability gap funding, etc. The legal framework was updated last year, and it is very clear now on how the roles are divided, the approval processes are working, and which timeline. It really helps also. Specifically, when you deal with small-scale PPPs, you're dealing with a lot of municipalities to go through PPP center to have them scrutinize their proposals, and they need that clarity, which then the law is giving them right now. So the clarity is required. It's there. For instance, for small-scale PPPs in Tanzania, there's now an understanding. We have a PPP steering committee who normally goes and sits on approval process for a revision process. They're taking advice from the PPP center regarding the large PPPs, whereby the smaller scale PPP actually go from the minister to their own PPP node, goes to the PPP center for review, and they will then advise them on the way forward. It goes back. It does not need to go to the PPP steering committee. It's all very well laid out right now, but however, if they do want like money for preparation of their feasibility studies, in the steering committee in order to get approval for that thing of that. So it's yeah,
Excuse me interrupting, Janita. We're running out of time for your presentation. So do you want to conclude so that we can ask some questions and maybe bring it back to the water project side as well on
As said, in Tanzania, the water projects are in the pipeline in Tanzania at this point in time. They're working on it right now. And the capacity building is going on, and the ministries the agencies are really focusing on getting the capacity to actually work on those water projects. So that is happening. This is the point I would like to make as well, is that capacity building is at the key of every small PPP and large PPP, of course. And the other is there is so much out there that can help you, give you on the screen combination of, especially on the left-hand side corner, there is so much out there that we getting from the World Bank, the guidelines, checklists, etc., to actually get on how to go about it. Private sector as well as the government can actually benefit from that greatly for small-scale PPPs, and those are the guys. Those most of for municipal PPPs, but private partners can also benefit from that.
So thank you, Janita.
So we're not inventing the wheel.
Yeah, very important. So I guess I'd like to bring it back to the water and wastewater as an area for small scale PPPs. You talk in general in Tanzania and potential projects, but what do you see are the main differentiating factors for, particularly for wastewater in smaller municipalities? How are Tanzania dealing with some of those issues to try and get projects off the ground? You talked about faster approval times and tax incentives. I'm just wondering if there are specifics for the wastewater sector that are being employed that we could hear about.
Yeah, that's a very good relevant question. For instance, we are looking very much at the capacity building at this point in time in order to help also the agencies to discuss all the options. For instance, we had I don't know if you know about the Matito project, which is a water plant in highly successful PPP. And they have come here, they have had discussions with Ministry of Water to explain the key elements of success for a PPP in water, whether it is a PPP. So for us, in terms of legal framework, institutional capacity, it's there. But in Tanzania, the knowledge base needs to be expanded in order to facilitate smaller scale PPPs. We even, myself, was tasked for a local government to develop a training on small scale PPPs to specifically zone in on the key factors of small scale PPP development.
And specifically on water and wastewater, or is this a general capacity building?
That was general capacity building with small scale PPPs in agriculture, and they envisioned the same. But we did bring in for the water sector, we did have discussions with the likes of AWID, those ones that are very instrumental behind the Kigali water plant PPP success. They also have one in Dubai in Egypt. To draw from their experience, for instance. So we do bring in the actual voice of the private partner sector into the capacity building program. And I think that is extremely good. Just to give you an example, I did give that training on small scale PPPs and took the officials that I was training to an actual live PPP, which was a water PPP. And when in the evaluation, the highlight of their week was not my training, it was the visits to the PPP and the discussions they had there. So it just makes that point.
That's a good information to know, actually, that you can't beat seeing the projects in action and understanding how they're working. Well, thank you very much, Janita, and we'll come back to you in the general Q&A. But we need to move on now to our last presenter today. Coming from a different part of the world, we've covered the African cases, and now we're moving to Latin America. So Pilar Castrocin works with the IDB. She's an economist with 7 years of experience working in the public and private sectors, and at the Inter-American Development Bank in the development of infrastructure with private participation in Latin America and the Caribbean. She's currently working as a PPP senior associate at the IDB PPP single window, with focus on the development and strengthening of regulatory and institutional frameworks for the implementation of PPPs. She's experienced in the identification, prioritization, and monitoring of PPP projects in a multiplicity of sectors and countries in ALC. And she's an IDB project analyst for the Infrascope development, which is a tool to assess the enabling environment. So welcome, Pilar. Please go ahead and share your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you to all of you for that really interesting presentations of different projects around the world. We are focused on Latin America, and we sometimes don't have enough information, so participating in these kind of things is really interesting. I'm trying to share my screen. Just allow me 1 second. Oh, what's going on?
Are you okay there? Should we talk?
Yeah, sorry, I was having so many problems. I'm so sorry.
Don't worry. We're there now.
I think it's my internet that wasn't loading here. Can you see my screen now? Yeah.
We can, thank you.
Perfect. So just a little introduction of the context in water and sanitation in Latin America and the Caribbean. The water and sanitation coverage is, it depends on what you are measuring here, but it's pretty high on average, but then the amount of countries that have full coverage is really low. It's a little bit better on water, and then when you go to wastewater treatment, goes a little bit down. But behind these general numbers, we have other problems that are behind these that are related to some things that were mentioned on previous presentations here. For example, the low fee collection, even though the tariffs are high on average in the region, are outdated and doesn't cover the operating costs. Then the costs are really high. We have a lot of problems with non-revenue water in the region. Also, utilities are usually public and then don't have more employees than needed for those type of utilities. The governance in water, and I like that graph that Pedro presented, is really complicated with several different institutions intervening in the process. Then the master plans are outdated, and there is a lack of data and production. I'm telling all these things here because I think this is a little bit a barrier, a challenge that we have in the region to increase private participation in a small, big, and every kind of PPPs in water and sanitation sector. On top of this, there is, as in other regions, a difference between what is coverage in urban areas and rural areas. And you can see here in the graphic and on the top this is water, access to water, and in the bottom is access to sanitation. And it depends on the definition that you use to measure this. You can see the differences between rural and urban areas, which rural being the challenging one and having much more problems with access than urban areas. And on top of this, this is something that is a really a big problem in several countries in Latin America, is that even though they have access to water, then the quality of the water is not good enough. And then people end up consuming a lot of bottled water, and the consumption of bottled water is pretty high in the region. So a couple of initiatives regarding small PPP contracts in the sector in Latin America and the Caribbean are being developed. One of those is this initiative in Peru. I bring this example to explain a little bit this initiative that Peru had a couple of years ago, and I think was in part successful. So what the government of Peru did was establish a regulation for unsolicited proposals and open the possibility for the private sector to present initiatives during a time frame. They give like a month, 2 months for presenting this kind of initiative for the private sector. And the idea of these initiatives needed to be to improve water and sanitation access in urban and rural areas, with focus on improving the quality of the service in those regions. And I think that that initiative that the government has, even though this particular project is still under formulation, and I think it's because of the structure of the project, because it requires a viability payments from the government. So this is here a little challenge. But this program, in my opinion, was successful in the sense that they catch the attention of the private sector into the development of some project that could be challenging for the private sector. So this was an initiative that presented for a Spaniard private group, and is being now analyzed by the public sector. We can talk more about the capacity that the public sector needs to be involved in this kind of projects, but I think in general is an interesting initiative.
Can I interrupt you? Can you go back to that slide, please, Pilar?
Yeah.
Could you explain to us what is different about this PPP compared to this approach rather than a normal PPP? Is it the length of the horizon? How is it differentiated?
Well, it's a small investment. So the investment is around $20 million, as Yanira was explaining in Tanzania. Usually these kind of programs, and we can see one at the end of my presentation, are more around $200 million. And so the scale of this initiative is pretty small, and is focused on rural areas in Peru, especially here in Loreto, that is like it's in the forest in the Amazonas, and it has a high poverty level. So I think that's the main difference. The initiative is pretty small, but and the idea that it's an unsolicited proposal, and that the private sector is interested in developing this kind of project, even though the amount of investment is smaller.
So typically with a smaller investment like this, the cost of setting up the PPP is overwhelming compared to the returns on the investment. So how do you overcome that with these smaller scale investments? Because you still have the same setup cost for $200 million wastewater treatment facility than you do for the 20 million. So I'm just wondering how that works.
Oh, I think is where the government needs to focus really on the impact that these kind of projects generate, and facilitate the resources needed to first the preparation stage of the structuring of a project, then try to see if there is a way to charge some fees to the users to have some income coming into the project. But then this kind of projects are gonna depend on viability payments from the government, for sure. So I think that that's a cost that the government needs to pay in some cases, given the high impact that this kind of project has.
Okay, thank you. Keep going.
So quick example here, and this is another management project, and I see on the questions here that they were saying, well, but this is a management contract, is not a PPP contract in the definition. And then Janita said something interesting and she said, well, I don't know if it's applied strictly the definition that we use all the time, but it works, and that's what is important. And this is another case of that. This is an example in Bahamas. Bahamas was having a lot of problems with a non-revenue water losses, and they were not finding a solution for this. And this was affecting the finance and the finance side of the PPP, of the utility, and the also the quality of the service, at the point of that the users prefer to leave the public utility and go and buy bottled water or water from private suppliers. So they decided to engage with the private sector in a 10-year contract. This was a little bit longer than the one explained before. And they have this contract based on key performance indicators to improve the efficiency of the utility in general, but with a strong focus on non-revenue water. So what they did was pretty similar of the case I was explained before. They did a baseline with a strategic plan of little investment that was followed and monitored by this private company during these 10 years. And the results that they had were amazing. And you can see here in the graphs how the losses go down, and the incomes go up, and the non-revenue water losses go down too. This has an impact not only on the income and the net earnings of the utility, but also a reduction of government subsidies. And this was especially important because they were Bahamas is an island, and they were spending a lot of money on desalination plants and water from those desalination that is more expensive than other type of water. So this engagement with the private sector, to not call it PPP in the strict sense, and the innovative approach of the private sector that brings a lot of efficiency. Maybe this is a good start, a good first step for some utilities in the region to do a little assessment of the situation, make some improvement that doesn't require so much capital, and then from that point decide if they need to do more. And
Is this your last slide now, Pilar?
Yeah, this is my last slide. Just one little comment to complement. So this is another case of Peru. Another example, as you see here, the capex is higher. This one is close to $90 million. Then the PPP team at the IDB is working on another big one that is like 6 treatment plants. But the point here is like that I wanted to share with you is the idea of try to see if there is a way to create a governance, if the technology is viable, to create a scale and be able to develop these kind of initiatives with the private sector. When you create like more high scale plants for example, wastewater treatment, but putting together a governance between different communities. And this is something that worked pretty well in an example in Spain in solid waste treatment, solid waste management. So just another idea of trying to create a scale through governance structures with different communities in an area. And that's my last slide. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Pilar. Could you close your slides for us? Thank you. Super. So I'm actually going to go to the main Q&A session now because we are running a little bit late, and maybe Pilar, you can help us with addressing some of the questions first. So, to all of the panelists now, if you'd like to jump back in, please don't share your slides, Pilar. If you could close them, otherwise we can't see anybody else. So listening to your presentation, and could you give us some kind of the key message that you would like to give about how municipalities can develop a PPP in water and wastewater infrastructure on a small scale? Is it necessary to have a blended finance model, or do you think that they can achieve that with a PPP model without help from IDB, for example?
Well, I think it depends. This is gonna be a question that will be answered on a case by case basis. And I think a blended finance is useful when you don't have enough financing, but in any case you need to have a strong project, a strong structured project. So what I think is important here, and to your question, yes, I think we can develop PPP project on a small scale, maybe without blending finance, but I think it's more important also to share with you that it is important to pay attention to the planning. I think before thinking in the financing that is in the last stage of a PPP, we need to think on the planification stage. And I think Latin America, for example, has a big challenge with that, where the water sanitation sector doesn't have identified all the needs that they have. They need to do better on that and analyze all the needs, and then you can define which of those needs can be attended through a PPP, or maybe through other kind of structures, like more traditional public infrastructure developments. And I think the region is doing like great job on several sectors on PPP, and being stronger on PPP through the last 20-30 years. We have countries like Chile, Brazil, Peru, or Colombia that are pretty strong, have a good and a strong environment for development of PPP, and they are the ones doing the first steps in water and sanitation. And I think these countries will be the first doing a small-scale PPP. In my opinion, small-scale PPP are more challenging. So you need to have first a strong base of capacities, institutions that are strong enough to be able to be innovative and creative, to create the environment to be able to develop these PPPs in a small scale.
Okay, thank you, Pilar. And I'd like to ask the other panelists as well, what in their opinion, how do they think that municipalities can develop PPPs on a small scale, and what they think that would be the best approach to try to replicate either the models they presented today or similar ones in their regions. So maybe we should go through in order of the original presentations, but I'd like you also think about other questions you'd like to ask each other. We'll start with Liliana, maybe.
Thank you, Amanda. So I mainly agree with what Pilar addressed, maybe regarding the funding and the finance mechanisms. We need to look the value for money and what is the best for the procurement entity, because usually public sector can have access to a better conditions than the private. So these also need to be balanced with all the aspects. Regarding the projects, if they can be considered or not for a PPP, we need, I think all of us touch on this, the planning stage, looking for social economic aspects, value for money, affordability tests. So I believe that these are the key aspects that we should consider. But in my humble opinion, private sector and public sector can work together in order to improve the coverage level of water access and sanitation. A lot of work needs to be done. And for one side is the responsibility of providing the service for the communities. And the other side, there is experience, efficiency, effectiveness that also the public sector can learn from it. So, of course, we are speaking about risk, sharing risk. These need to be properly assessed. But in the end of the day, with a very well planning process, with the strength capacity of the procurement agency, I believe that in the end of the day, everyone wins, particularly the communities that is our end target in the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think you're both saying similar things actually in terms of the need to start by looking at the whole picture and what needs to be put into the plan so that the priority can be given to the right areas. And I liked your comment about the socioeconomic aspects of these programs, because the water, as we know, is an area that brings more than just value in terms of drinking water, but also health to the community and other benefits for GDP. So an interesting one. How about we move to Janita for her comments on that question? Do you remember the question? Is that, or do you want me to repeat it?
The question to me?
Well, yeah. So the question was, how do you think municipalities can deal with small scale projects, and what can be done to scale up the number of these type of projects in a realistic way?
Yes, I thought you meant from the panel, from the viewers. Yeah, so for a lot of municipalities, from my experiences, I see it now very closely at this point in time, is that a lot of municipalities they look at PPPs, but they haven't gotten the understanding of best practices in PPPs yet. So for a lot of municipalities, it's a new thing, and moving away from the traditional way of working towards PPP modeling is a big step. And there was someone who said in the questions also, from how do you go about after the first workshop on the knowledge transfer? And this is where I wanted to point out, bringing in development partners for small scale PPPs is an excellent way to do this, because you don't just have that one workshop where municipalities will understand what the tools are available to them, how to go about PPPs, what are best practices in PPPs, but they can embed a transactional advisory consultant in their offices for a while, that actually work with them to start the financial modeling, guide them through the actual process of identifying, but also the appraisal, the preparation. And by the time that they leave, there is a knowledge base within the municipality that they can then, of course, you have to have a plan in order to transfer that to whoever comes in. So I think that's what step one is, really to look at that possibility.
Create a knowledge base, in other words. Yeah, thank you. And Pedro, would you like to comment on this?
Yes, but in our case, it's a little bit different because the government structure in Mozambique is different from the other countries. So in our case, we have one central agency which is responsible for small town water supply, and we have another agency responsible for large urban cities. So the municipality issue does not apply. However, if you look to the numbers that I was trying to put, is like in average, our small towns would require something like $4.2 million of investment. So if you bring a cluster of 10 towns, we will be talking about $42 million. But if you bring a cluster of 5 towns, you can come up to a cluster of 25 million dollars. So this is the way we can do, not through the municipality, because our government structure does not allow the municipality to be them running PPPs, but central agents. Yeah, running PPPs.
And
but
do you think that model could apply in other countries? Because it's a little bit unique in Mozambique?
I don't know about, I don't think that it can be applied in English speaking countries, because the government structure, they have already completed the devolution to the decentralized level. So you don't need to go back again. But in our case, we have a central agency. Maybe in Uganda, it can be applied, I think, because they have, for example, a little bit more centralized system. Yeah. I don't know about other countries.
Yeah, I think the principle in itself could be applied, maybe at a municipal level to cluster projects together, depending on the size of the country and the number of people in the population. That it's certainly an interesting approach. We have a number of questions in the Q&A, and I thought maybe, given we have quite a few, we should run through those rather than the ones that I come up with. So we have 10 or 15 minutes left, so please keep the answers fairly short. But we have one for Pilar here, asking what kind of service for sanitation specifically could be implemented in the rural areas of Lorito, where sewerage is not possible. That she's got Mercedes Castro, who's asking this question, has a particular interest there where she's working on plans where there is extreme poverty and there's no possibility to think about community contributions. Pilar, do you have a response for her on this?
Oh, I was sorry, I was trying to find the question here in the chat.
If you go to the Q&A, there's a question, one of the early ones from Mercedes Castro, and she said, Pilar, what kind of service for sanitation could be implemented in the rural areas of Loreto, where people are so poor that they cannot actually contribute?
Yeah, and unfortunately, I don't have many details about that project. I was like bringing the example to focus more in the idea of the planification of the government and created a plan and paying attention to rural areas needs. But I don't have information to go deep on how they are planning to implement this with the communities. But I think is key here to engage with them and do a stakeholder management program and try also to include in the PPP education for the communities on how they should manage the resource of water and how they need to work with the private sector that is going to be managing the utility. This is key. The involvement of the community, of course, is going to be key for this.
So in other words, in the very poor areas where it's not going to work without voluntary help from the community, this is one of the options, is to have in-kind contribution through the communities supporting and helping to do some of the operation and maintenance, for example. But they need to recognize, first of all, the benefits and have that capacity building educational process.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's an interesting point of view. Thank you. We have another question from Andrew Kinlock, who's asking, and this is not particularly aimed to anyone, so please put your hand up to answer. Are you seeing that private sector participants are prepared to take long-term municipality payment risk, or do they expect the central government to provide support for the municipality? So I'm guessing this is geared to one of the presenters that had case studies. So either Pedro or Liliana.
Okay, I can start. Let's see. Yeah, you are talking about the risk in terms of the ability of private sector to collect revenues.
Yeah, so it's saying that the private sector investor are they prepared to take on the risk that they have to collect the payment risk?
Yeah, in our model, we want to allocate this risk to private sector because our understanding is that they need to be an active, because if we start providing some sort of guarantee for the government, we might be incentivizing low performance, because they know that if they don't collect, they will get money for the government. So we want them to make an effort to collect revenues. In our model, we want them to do that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Does anyone else want to answer that question?
Maybe I could add something on this point, not this specific case, but this question need to be properly linked with the tariff approach in the country. So what is the procedures for tariff review? What is the risk, exchange rate risk? How is it addressed in the PPP? So a lot of things need to be put together because this can be a high risk. Of course, the efficiency on collecting revenue should be on the private side because it's the way that they will have to receive to amortize the initial investment. But what else, other aspects need also to be considered, because the risk can be very high and need to be balanced. Otherwise, unbalanced contracts usually don't go to a very nice end.
And actually, this maybe takes us back to the question in the chat on the non-revenue water. We have another question from Jyoti asking if a national policy is needed before it can be used as a project-specific indicator or payment based at local level. And secondly, if it must be connected to the water utility or could be implemented in a local community-driven water solution. So I suppose the broader question really is around non-revenue water and how this could be used as a way to incentivize the private sector to get involved. I know there are some cases where that piece has been parceled off, as it were, to the private sector. It creates value for the utility, and it's an easy area to create revenue. Do any of you have some points to make on non-revenue water?
If I may, I think regulation is always needed. In this case, this type of services that are regulated, and the regulator should establish what this means, what is the level that should be achieved, and so on. So I think, of course, the clearer the rules in every sense for the sector and for PPPs, the better. And then as you were saying, Amanda, it's important also to work in creating incentives. Given that you have defined rules, then go in and defining the contract, the incentives and the KPIs attached to the revenues and attached to the compensation or the penalties that the private sector will receive if they comply or not with the KPIs. So I think thinking in this type of structures in the contract where you are defining, and also with the collection of the fees, if you are transferring a risk to the private sector, well, we need to analyze that and make sure that they are able to manage that risk better than the other part, and that will create the value for money that Liliana was mentioning before, putting together a little bit all the comments.
Thank you all. We're getting to the end of our time now, and I wanted to give you all a chance to give your 30-second last statement. If you were to say one message to everybody, what would that be? And then I'm going to hand the floor back to Ziad to close off today. So Janita, you're on my top of my screen. 30 seconds. What message would you like to send?
Well, to build on to what you've been discussing, I think the expression "good accounts make good friends" applies here. If you are, PPPs are performance based, so, but they're also all about the risk structuring. So it depends on the risk structuring on a case-to-case basis, how you approach it. So the homework phase is the most important phase of a PPP.
Thank you. Pedro, 30 seconds.
Yeah, thank you very much. As we said before, this is a still work in progress, and we hope that our model can attract both donors to the grant component and also private sector investors to the investment side, so that they can join this adventure that we are trying to.
So the proof is in the pudding in your case, as they say. Pilar, do you have a last statement?
I would like to add as a last statement, focus on planification, on understanding the needs and the impact that these kind of interventions can make to make the sector and the interventions a priority for the government, and then creating enabling environments for private participation and creating capacities in governments to be able to manage and be creative and innovative and work together with the private sector.
Thank you. And Liliana.
So I will say that public and private together will be able to speed up the conditions in water access and sanitation. We heard here today that is complex, is risky, is true, but we can start small. It is important to start and to progress, because otherwise it will be very difficult to improve the indicators that we have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm very, very happy to have had all your interventions today. I think you've made a very interesting showcase of these different examples of the difficulties in trying to solve the problem for small-scale PPPs in the water and wastewater sector. And for everybody attending, we're going to make all this available online, both through recording and also through the slides. And please get in touch with us if you'd like to reach out to any of the speakers directly for more information. And I hand over to Ziad, please, for your last
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Amanda. Thank you, everyone. It was very interesting conversation. There are some topics that we did not get a chance to discuss today, and I hope that we will have other sessions on the water and wastewater sector. Notably, I think we need to talk more about wastewater infrastructure in small towns, and we need to talk about metering. I think that metering is important. Actually, metering can be standalone projects. I mean, you can have PPP projects for metering and combine that with power metering, so electricity and water meters. That would create, I mean, that is where really one can benefit from private sector capabilities and new technology. I think that we didn't talk much about raising public awareness, where many people think that water should be delivered to them for free, and how that needs to be dealt with in local communities. I think, interestingly, I mean, the topic that Pedro raised about making sure that the payment is actually there is no government guarantee on payment. This is an approach that I know is not widely implemented, but deserves a lot of attention to see how, and if there are other places in the world where this has worked. So, and last but not least, I take you know, the topic that several of you mentioned, and you know, it's in different ways you've approached it, which is that it's not just the impact of the project itself that needs to be discussed. It's not only just the value for money. It is the value to the economy, and that includes value, I mean, to things like the health and how good water can affect health expenditure for the government. So there's a lot to be discussed, really. I think it's a very interesting sector. One session was definitely not enough, so we have to go back and visit it again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ziad.
And
Thank you,
please join WAP if you're not members.
Yes, exactly. And thank you very much to all our panelists.